Welcome to Washington Today for February 24th, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron met at the White House today about ending Russia's war in Ukraine. Their meeting coming on the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. We'll hear what they had to say about possible peace talks, dealing with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the U.S.'s continued support of Europe coming up. The G7 nations held a virtual summit today to talk about ways to end the war. At the meeting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy appealed to President Trump for continued U.S. support. That plea came after the U.S. joined Russia, North Korea, Belarus, and 14 other countries in voting against a UN resolution that condemned the Russian invasion and called for its occupied territory to be returned to Ukraine. In Congress, House leaders are hoping to move fast this week on their blueprint to pass President Trump's agenda to cut taxes, reduce wasteful spending, and secure the U.S. border. The House Rules Committee is scheduled to vote on the resolution this evening. If they approve it, it will then move to the House floor, where Republicans can only afford to lose one vote. House Speaker Mike Johnson says that vote will happen this week. We'll hear from him and members of the Rules Committee coming up. And reaction and response continues to Elon Musk's email to federal workers asking to, quote, understand what they got done last week or face possible termination. CNN reports that managers at the Pentagon, FBI, State, Homeland Security, and Energy departments all instructed their staff not to reply, while other managers, including at the Department of Health and Human Services, told workers to comply only later to reverse course. Still others simply told their staff to wait until Monday and not to reply to the note before then. The email also prompted a group of federal employee unions to expand their lawsuit against Musk's efforts. And late word this afternoon from thehill.com that the Office of Personnel Management informed agency leaders that employee response to the email is voluntary and that failure to do so will not be considered a resignation. But we begin at the White House, where President Trump and President Macron were complimentary about their talks. Here's President Trump.
My meeting with President Macron today was another important step forward in that sphere, because he's been very much involved right from the beginning in trying to get it over with, and we're going to get it done. I believe that Emmanuel agrees with me on many of the most important issues. Chief among them is this is the right time. It may be the only time. You know, that's a very interesting and horrible situation, and that could evolve into a third world war. We're not going to let that happen. Should have never started, but it did. And what a mess, what a horrible, bloody mess. I'm also pleased that President Macron agrees that the cost and burden of securing the peace must be borne by the nations of Europe, not alone by the United States. And Europe must take that central role in assuring long-term security of Ukraine, which they want to do. And that's not a very big step. A big step is what's going to happen over the next few weeks. The United States has put up far more aid for Ukraine than any other nation. Hundreds of billions of dollars. We've spent more than $300 billion, and Europe has spent about $100 billion. That's a big difference, and at some point we should equalize. But hopefully we won't have to worry about that. We have other things happening that maybe take that out of the realm of necessity. And while we've given vast amounts of military aid and money in form of grants, much of Europe's contribution has been economic relief structured as loans for which they'll be repaid. Like the Europeans, I believe that taxpayers in the United States also deserve to recoup the colossal amounts of money that we've sent.
And here's French President Emmanuel Macron.
Mr. President, I really wish to thank you for making changes to your schedule to meet with us so quickly. I think we've made very substantive steps forward during our discussions, and this is a major step in what we're experiencing today. We had a video conference with all of the G7 leaders, which was an opportunity for us to discuss this matter 3 days after the Russian war in Ukraine, and to express our support for President Zelenskyy to the Ukrainian people, but also to speak and share about our desire for a lasting peace. This is what we have spoken about very forcibly over the past few weeks. We thought that this war was only going to last a few weeks when it broke out in 2022. We admire greatly the courage of the Ukrainian people. And, Mr. President, I wish to thank you for this. You mentioned that there are responsibilities on Europe's side, and indeed, we have invested $128 billion in aid to Ukraine and the Ukrainians. Ukraine has been able to hold the front of our collective security. It's fought over these past few years for its independence and for its sovereignty, but also for our collective security, because I think that no one in this room wants to live in a world where it's the law of the strongest and international borders can be violated from one day to the next by anyone. Over the past few hours, and as you mentioned this, Mr. President, we've been able to see a few things take shape. First of all, allow me to commend you on your decision to work with President Zelenskyy and to conclude this agreement that's so important for the U.S. and Ukraine on rare earths, critical minerals, but also having substantive conversations with President Zelenskyy during this key phase of achieving this deal, which is a major commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, and I think that's very commendable. We also have a shared desire to build peace.
And here's what they had to say about working with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
My experience with President Putin is the following. Number one, I always think it's good to have discussion with other leaders, and especially when you disagree. I stopped my discussion with President Putin after Bucha and the war crimes because I considered that, we had nothing to get from him in that time. Now this is a chance, there is a big change because there is a new U.S. administration. So this is a new context. So there is good reason for President Trump to re-engage with President Putin. But my experience is the following, and I shared it with President Trump and the team. In 2014, our predecessors negotiated peace with President Putin. But because of the lack of guarantees, and especially security guarantees, President Putin violated this peace. And I had several discussions, especially at the beginning of 2022, several times, 7 hours with President Putin, 15 days before the launching of the attack. He denied everything, but we didn't have security guarantees. So this is why being strong and having deterrence capacities is the only way to be sure it will be respected. And I insisted on that, and this is why I believe that the US has the capacity to do so. And this is why I think we should never say, I will never send any boots on the ground, because you give a blank check to violate any type of commitment. So I think it's good to have discussion. I think it's useful to have negotiation. I think it's super important to go to the peace. But my strong point was to say, let's try to get something first which can be assessed, checked and verified. And let's be sure that we build sufficient guarantees on the short run. And this is where we are ready to be engaged. As for France, a lot of my European colleagues are ready to be engaged. But we do need this American backup, because this is part of the credibility of the security guarantees, and this is our collective deterrence capacity. And I have the feeling that the President has this capacity.
I think it's very much to the benefit of Russia to make a deal, and I feel that we'll do that. It is what it is. Again, it's a war that should have never been started. It's a war that would not have been started if I were president, but it did start, and it's at a terrible level where cities are burned down and shot down to the ground. It looks like demolition sites, a whole big pile of demolition sites, and we got to get it stopped. Too many people, too much agony. The whole culture is destroyed when you rip down some of those really ancient or near ancient buildings. It's so sad to see, but I think it's very much to the benefit of this tremendous distrust on both sides. That's why it's good that I'm coming in now. But I think it's to the very much benefit of Russia to make a deal and to go on with leading Russia in a very positive way. That's what you have to do. But I really believe that he wants to make a deal. Maybe wrong, but I believe he wants to make a deal.
And President Macron was also asked about continued U.S.-European cooperation. Here's his answer through an interpreter.
The question is whether or in what form the U.S. will contribute. And during our discussions, and during the discussions with Russia, we've understood that this would be acceptable to Russia, and that's a very important area of progress. And that means that in this context, the Europeans will shoulder their part of the burden, their share of the burden. We have a strong alliance that we've built over the decades. We have our solidarity, and we have deterrence capacities. What does it mean? Would it be dangerous? If there is an agreement signed by Ukraine and Russia, thanks to the efforts of President Trump, and if we provide the guarantees and Russia violates the agreement, then it would be in conflict with everyone who is engaged in the peace process. And that is a change. That was something we did not see in the past. That's not what we saw in 2014. So that is the real change that we're marking. We have this deterrence capacity on the American side. We have the capacity for engagement on the European side, and that's something we're going to continue working on together. It's not dangerous, but it's credible. It's less dangerous than things that could happen in the long term. And I think this is what we need to do to ensure security. And I say this very clearly. We're also talking about security for Europeans. I've been saying this for weeks now. If we do not guarantee the security of this territory within Europe, then how can we guarantee our own security for one and all? We live just 1,500 kilometers from Ukraine, and the Germans and Polish are even closer. So our collective security is important. We need to answer this call for Europeans to be more engaged, and Americans will be there still in solidarity. Europeans are working for their collective security, but I really think this was a turning point today in our discussions.
Meanwhile, at the G7 meeting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy appealed to President Trump for continued U.S. support.
President Trump, we would really like to hear from you because all of our people, our families are very worried. Will there be support from America? Will America be the leader of the free world? And I want to be very honest with you. For our people, for life in general, it's so important that American support, American assistance remain.
And the BBC reporting today that Ukraine and the U.S. are close to signing a deal over U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral deposits. We heard the two leaders mention that deal. The president talked about that.
It looks like we're getting very close. The deal's being worked on, and we're, I think, getting very close to getting an agreement where we get our money back over a period of time. But it also gives us something where I think it's very beneficial to their economy, to them as a country. But you know, we're in for $350 billion. How we got there, I don't know, but that's a lot of money, a lot of money invested, and we had nothing to show for it. And it was the Biden administration's fault. The Europeans are in for about $100 billion, and they do it as in the form of a loan. And the Europeans have been great on this issue. They understood it wasn't fair, and we were able to work something out. But with the Ukrainians, I think I can say that we're very close. Scott's around here someplace, and I think we can say that we're very, hi Scott, I think we're very close. Do you have something to say about that, Scott?
We are very close. The
Good.
1 yard line.
All right, good.
Mr. President.
And the president there making a reference to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. At least one Democrat doesn't like this deal with Ukraine. Here's House Intelligence Committee member Jim Himes yesterday on Fox News Sunday.
I have two problems with that concept. One, it just looks like an episode of The Sopranos, right? Give us your minerals or we're not going to help you fight a bloody butcher. I mean, is this really what we want the greatest country in history to be known for like, some mafia thing? Look, we've always stood with the good guys. We stood with Churchill against Hitler in World War I, and we stood with the good guys. Even when we've gotten it wrong in Vietnam, we were standing with the good guys against the Viet Cong. In Iraq, we were going after Saddam Hussein. Now this president is standing with the bad guy. He's saying Zelenskyy is the problem, when Zelenskyy, with very few resources, is trying to stand up for democracy against a totalitarian butcher. What really worries me, Shannon, though, is what do you think President Xi is thinking? Because President Xi wakes up every single morning thinking, is today the day I go into Taiwan, right? And he says, look at that. Donald Trump stands with the authoritarian invaders, not with the people who are being invaded. And now you're talking about the real possibility that American troops get involved in something that was facilitated by the mafia-like activities of Donald Trump.
And more now on the U.S. vote in the United Nations today. The Washington Post calling it, quote, a major break with Europe. Now, the resolution passed overwhelmingly in the General Assembly, the resolution that the U.S. voted against. The Post also writing, quote, the vote taken on the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine was an astounding reflection of the deepening split between the Trump administration and its major allies over support for Ukraine and disapproval of President Donald Trump's unilateral outreach to the Kremlin to settle the war on terms favorable to Russia. You can read more about this vote at WashingtonPost.com, and you can see all of our coverage of President Macron's visit today to the White House at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app. More reaction now on Elon Musk's mass email to federal workers demanding they explain their work, and warned that failure to do so, quote, will be taken as a resignation. According to an Office of Personnel Management email obtained by thehill.com, quote, during a Chief Human Capital Officers Council meeting, OPM informed agency that employee responses to the OPM email is voluntary. That email also said, quote, OPM also clarified that a non-response to the email does not equate to a resignation. Now, earlier today, the federal unions challenging Elon Musk's efforts said in their brief, prior to February 22nd, this is a quote, February 22nd, 2025, federal employees were not required to submit any reports regarding their work to OPM. The suit goes on to say, quote, on information and belief, no OPM rule, regulation, policy, or program has ever in the United States history purported to require all federal workers to submit reports to OPM. Their hearing on this is set for Thursday in federal court in San Francisco. And the Washington Post also writing today about the State Department, FBI, Pentagon, and other agency pushback of Elon Musk's memo. That article writing, quote, it's perhaps the first big example of would-be allies publicly resisting Musk's influence. Musk's tactics have been rubbing some Trump advisors the wrong way, as the Post reported on Friday, but tensions hadn't really broken out into the open. They go on to write, quote, but beyond that is how it all squares with the White House's claims about Musk's role. Just 5 days before the fiasco, after all, the White House had claimed Musk had no formal or actual authority. Then he basically threatened to end the employment of large numbers of federal workers if those employees didn't do what he told them. The question from there is on what and on whose authority he's supposedly acting. And here's what the president said about Elon Musk's email today at the White House.
There was a lot of genius in sending it. We're trying to find out if people are working. And so we're sending a letter to people. Please tell us what you did last week. If people don't respond, it's very possible that there is no such person or they're not working.
Some of the agency heads instructed their employees not to respond because they were waiting on further guidance. But Elon Musk's tweet said a failure to respond would be taken as a resignation. So there's been a disconnect in communications. Yeah. Are you concerned at all about that?
No. That was done in a friendly manner. Only things such as perhaps Marco at State Department, where they have very confidential things, or the FBI, where they're working on confidential things. And they don't mean that in any way combatively with Elon. They're just saying there are some people that you don't want to really have them tell you what they're working on last week. But other than that, I think everyone thought it was a pretty ingenious idea. We have to find out where these people are. Who are they? And we said if you don't respond, we assume you're not around.
And that holds, that stands.
And you're not getting paid anymore, too.
And at least one Republican is calling for Elon Musk to show some restraint. Here's Utah Senator John Curtis on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday.
So listen, let's go back to $36,000 trillion of debt, and we have to do something dramatic. Now, to answer your question, I don't believe so. You know, I just published an op-ed, desert.com, and I talk about my experience as mayor and having to do similar things. If I could say one thing to Elon Musk, it's like, please put a dose of compassion in this. These are real people. These are real lives. These are mortgages. It's a false narrative to say we have to cut and you have to be cruel to do it as well. We can do both.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not just about efficiency, though. I mean, the president himself has characterized this as getting rid of bad people.
You know, I regret that narrative. We all know, you know, thousands, millions of federal workers who are good people, who work hard. But the reality of it is we have 3 million federal workers. Not all of them do. Many aren't coming to work. In my business...
Working from home, you mean?
Working from home. Let's hope they're working from home. We don't know. That's why the email. What are you doing? It's not unusual in a corporate setting to have people report and explain what they're doing, especially if they're working from home. So I don't think this is a request that is that difficult. I would ask my employees to let me know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But I will double down on the fact of we don't need to be so cold and hard, and let's put a little compassion and, quite frankly, dignity in this as well.
Utah Republican Senator John Curtis on Face the Nation yesterday. Minnesota Democratic Senator Tina Smith also pushing back on Elon Musk's efforts. She posted on X, the platform Elon Musk owns, quote, "I bet a lot of people have had an experience like this with a bad boss. There's an email in your inbox on Saturday night saying, prove to me your worthiness by Monday or else I'm on the side of the workers, not the billionaire bosses." Now, that post prompted a response from Elon Musk himself. He asked Senator Smith, quote, what did you get done last week? Senator Smith responded to him, quote, "At Elon Musk, I hate to break it to you, but you aren't my boss. I answer to the people of Minnesota, but since you bring it up, I spent last week fighting to stop tax breaks for billionaires like you, paid for by defunding health care for moms and babies." And the National Park Service has announced service reductions as a result of the Trump administration's firing of probationary workers. Among them, the canceling of guided tours at Carlsbad Caverns National Park. Self-guided tours are also canceled as of March 23rd. Saguaro National Park has closed its visitor centers on Mondays, and Yosemite National Park has delayed the sale of summer permits for 5 campgrounds indefinitely. And the San Francisco Chronicle reported on Saturday that a group of Yosemite employees hung an upside-down American flag over the side of El Capitan in the park to protest the National Park Service downsizing. Gavin Carpenter, a maintenance mechanic at the park, told the Chronicle, quote, "We're bringing attention to what's happening at the parks, which are every American's properties. It's super important we take care of them, and we're losing people here, and it's not sustainable if we want to keep the parks open." You're listening to Washington Today.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered. C-SPAN Now is a free mobile app featuring your unfiltered view of what's happening in Washington, live and on demand. Keep up with the day's biggest events with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more from the world of politics, all at your fingertips. You can also stay current with the latest episodes of Washington Journal and find scheduling information for C-SPAN's TV networks and C-SPAN Radio, plus a variety of compelling podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play, or visit our website, cspan.org/cspan now. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today. As we mentioned, the House Rules Committee is meeting this afternoon on the Republican budget resolution. Here's the chair, Virginia Fox.
It is not lost on me, or frankly anyone, on our side of the aisle for that matter, that there will be spurious caricatures and distorted criticism that will be lobbed at this budget resolution. Before that even happens, let's talk about what it really does and how it will work to put the nation back upon a sound footing where it belongs. First, the budget resolution aligns with the American people's mandate from November 5th and delivers upon President Trump's robust America First agenda. It eliminates the possibility of the greatest tax increase in history being levied against every American and their families. It provides ample resources to the military so that the common defense of the nation remains unencumbered. It also allocates the necessary critical resources to the Trump administration so it can further secure the border and reinforce national security. And this budget resolution instructs committees to begin the important work of trimming wasteful programs, right-sizing our fiscal footprint, and putting us on a path to fiscal sanity as opposed to the death march that Democrat control has left us on as it stands. President Trump specifically requested, quote, one big, beautiful bill, end quote, and House Republicans have answered that request with a constructive, full-bodied product. This blueprint is a framework on which Congress can deliver the agenda the American people want and deserve.
And here's Ranking Member Jim McGovern.
Today, we're here to discuss the Republican budget, a budget, in my opinion, that is a betrayal of the middle class. There is nothing America first about this budget. This is about gutting programs that help everyday people so that Republicans can give more handouts to billionaires and special interests. I mean, I keep hearing Republicans run these ads about how their budget is going to put money in regular people's pockets. Talk about misleading. You conveniently forgot to mention that billions and billions this budget gives away to the ultra-rich. And you forgot to mention that you're stealing from regular people to do it. People will see their costs go up. In other words, everyday people, teachers, nurses, firefighters, police officers, farmers, plumbers, laborers are going to get screwed. And I've seen this before. I saw it in 2017, the last time Trump was in the White House. Republicans love rigging the economy for the ultra-wealthy. And today, here they are, keeping the gravy train rolling for billionaires, making it possible for them to pay a lower effective tax rate than the working people of this country. And by the way, you know who else loves this budget? The price-gouging corporations that have been squeezing families at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and on their rent checks. A lot of them pay nothing in taxes. They pay nothing. In fact, nearly 50 companies in the S&P 500 reported paying no income tax expenses in 2023. And you wouldn't dare do anything about that. And then Republicans have the nerve to lecture us about fiscal responsibility. They claim they care about the deficit, but they can't help themselves because this budget blows a massive hole in the deficit. You have $2.7 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in tax giveaways for the ultra-rich contained in this budget. And in the same breath, they're slashing programs that help everyday people. Oh, they're coming after Medicaid, and they're coming after Social Security, and they're coming after Medicare, and they're coming after SNAP, a program that ensures that kids and seniors do not go hungry.
Now, you can see the whole Rules Committee hearing at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now. They are scheduled to vote later this evening. And TheHill.com reporting that House Republican leaders hope to get the resolution on the floor as early as tomorrow. House Speaker Mike Johnson talked about that with TownHall.com editor Guy Benson and how he feels about the bill's prospects this week.
Are you confident, and how would you measure that level of confidence that you're going to get this through? This is step one, right? Getting to the vehicle with literally no margin for error. Because I think there's at least one member who's a no. There may be more than one, but they'll get there. We're going to get everybody there. This is a prayer request. Just pray this through for us, because it is very high stakes, and everybody knows that. And as we were talking in the hall guy a little while ago, somebody noted a couple weeks ago, the thing about having a small majority is it brings great clarity. It's clarifying, you know. I don't think anybody wants to be in front of this train. I think they want to be on it. And people come at with genuine conviction, you know, about the debt and the deficit and about these issues and that issue. But I'm often reminded, and I remind my colleagues all the time, of what Ronald Reagan reminded us. I'd rather get 80% of what I want than go over the cliff with the flag waving. And for those of us who believe in limited government and liberty and opportunity and security, prosperity, we have to recognize that an aircraft carrier is not turned on a dime. It takes 3 miles to turn an aircraft carrier, right? It took us decades to get into the situation we're in. It is not likely that we're going to fix everything in one bill in one foul swoop. So, but if we can make great strides in these areas and we begin to change the trajectory of the carrier, we can turn it around. And if we do that well, and we demonstrate to all these new demographics who came into the party now, that it truly is our principles, our core conservative principles that lead to human flourishing. It is our principles that are better for them as individuals, families, you know, a community, their state, the nation as a whole, then we will be able to hold this as a governing majority for years to come. This can be an historic moment for our party and our principles, and this is the first step in what will be many steps. It's day by day.
He also talked about the differences between the House and Senate approaches, the House favoring a one-bill approach, while the Senate includes 2 bills.
No, this is a very friendly debate. These are all very close friends, and there's no daylight between the House and Senate Republicans, and that's very important. I mean, there's no animosity here at all. We're all trying to accomplish the same exact mission. They just see it from different lenses in the Senate that we do in the House. And when I lay out all the complexities, Ted, Lindsey, and John, none of them can refute that. They just go, "Oh, yeah, that's tough. Yeah, I know. Thanks a lot. Welcome to my life." So, look, I think what happens, they passed their resolution last week. And whatever they're calling that, that's a plan B, that's fine. But I said you have to allow the House to lead on this by necessity. We need to, we have to. I have the more complicated equation to solve. Here's another thing, too, that everybody needs to remember, and this will mean something to the folks in this room. We have new revenue inputs that really ought to be factored into this. I mean, the tariffs policy that the president's pursuing is going to be scored by the Congressional Budget Office as a number, you know, some significant number. The 10% tariffs on China could be a large number, just that alone. And then what DOGE is doing, you know, cutting down the size and scope of government pretty dramatically, results in a massive cost saving.
And here's Daniela Diaz, political reporter for Notice on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, talking about the differences between the House and Senate approaches.
That's really the drama that's taking place on Capitol Hill and has been taking place on Capitol Hill since the Republican trifecta entered office, was whether they can really enact this massive agenda that they want to push through a process called budget reconciliation, which means they wouldn't need Democratic votes to pass this legislation, this massive bill that they want to push forward. So the drama here being Trump endorsed the House version for one bill, Senate Republicans are moving forward with 2 as their plan B. And we're going to see the House put this measure, their version, on the floor for a vote tomorrow night. But right now, Speaker Mike Johnson doesn't have the votes.
Why is it important, 2 bills versus 1 bill? What's the difference here?
Well, the problem being they need all the votes in the House Republican conference. And as you know, as I know, as our viewers know, there are a lot of personalities in Congress. And so trying to get all of them united, because Republicans have such a slim majority and can only afford to lose 1 Republican vote behind a bill as important as this one to enact the Trump agenda, that's why they want to push forward 1 bill in the hopes that if there's certain provisions in that measure, in that legislation that 1 Republican, 2 Republicans don't agree with, they agree with the others, they can push that forward. Of course, this legislation would extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts, would have billions of dollars in border security measures. But the other thing is they want to push this forward without trying to increase the national deficit by more trillions of dollars. So that's really the discussion that's taking place and why we're seeing a lot of political infighting within the Republican conference on both sides about how to handle this.
And on the Senate floor this afternoon, Republican leader John Thune talked about the Senate's resolution.
Mr. President, early Friday morning, the Senate passed a budget resolution to lay the groundwork for border, energy, and national security legislation. We considered a lot of amendments from my Democrat colleagues, not one of which, interestingly enough, was centered on border security and very few of which addressed either national security or energy security. But that was, I have to say, not terribly surprising. After all, the Democrat leader seemed to think to the very end that this budget resolution had something to do with tax cuts for billionaires, even though it has absolutely and exactly nothing to do with tax cuts of any kind. I'm not sure if he was honestly confused or merely felt that he could achieve something messaging-wise by pretending this bill had something to do with billionaires. But for the record, Mr. President, let me review what this bill was about. As everyone here knows, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, the chaos that President Biden allowed to rage at our southern border left a gaping hole in our national security. That's a hole that President Trump and Republicans are determined to close. And since day one of his administration, President Trump has been fulfilling his campaign promise to crack down on illegal immigration and secure our border. In addition to surging support to the southern border, his administration has been focused on arresting and deporting criminal aliens from rapists and murderers to child sex predators and dangerous gang members. And they've made a lot of progress already. But as the president's border czar made clear to Republican senators 2 weeks ago, these efforts cannot continue without additional funding from Congress. And so Republicans are moving forward on legislation to fund continued efforts to deport criminal aliens, as well as provide other necessary resources to secure our border, discourage illegal immigration, and restore respect for the rule of law. That, Mr. President, was what Friday's budget resolution was about. And it's too bad that my Democrat colleagues aren't interested in joining us on border security legislation. But I will tell you, Mr. President, with or without Democrats, Republicans are moving full speed ahead. We owe the American people a secure border, and we intend to give it to them.
Meanwhile, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer talked about U.S. efforts to support Ukraine in its fight against Russia.
For 3 years, the United States has been clear on where we stand. We have stood on the side of democracy, the inviolability of borders, and the freedom of nations, and against Vladimir Putin. We passed in this chamber robust bipartisan security assistance. The U.S. united the leaders of the West, and for years we succeeded in turning Putin into a pariah. But today, on this third anniversary of Putin's war, Donald Trump is turning his back on the values that America stands for, of democracy, of security, and of liberty. Instead of standing up to Putin, Donald Trump is siding with him and against our own allies. Instead of condemning Putin's lies, Donald Trump is parroting Russian misinformation and propaganda in defiance of all evidence, without regard to any facts, and with utter contempt for the truth. Today, President Trump met with President Macron. President Macron is advising Donald Trump not to show weakness to Putin at this pivotal moment. Donald Trump should heed President Macron's warning, or else Putin is going to eat his lunch, and America is going to suffer in the long term. American support of pro-Western democracy under attack is not charity. It's about our own long-term security. For Donald Trump to show weakness to Putin is to endanger America's security tomorrow. If history tells us one thing about autocrats, it's that their hunger is never satiated. It's never enough. They will keep going one way or another until they are halted. What are Poland and Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia supposed to think about Putin's belligerence next door to them? What is NATO supposed to make of Donald Trump's eagerness to deal with autocrats instead of our own allies? If Donald Trump sells out democracy in Europe today, what will Donald Trump sell out tomorrow? Democracy in America? Our national security, which he's already starting to do? The way Donald Trump is engaging with Vladimir Putin right now is not going to make America any safer in the long run. This all goes back to a pattern we've seen from Donald Trump from the very beginning. He has always admired autocrats, strongmen, and bullies, always shown contempt for the rule of law, for truth, for accountability, for facts. because his ultimate goal is to skew things in favor of the wealthy and corrupt few at the expense of everybody else. Just like his push for taxes, just like his empowering Doge, Donald Trump's modus operandi is to trample on safeguards and basic accountability, values central to any free democracy, in order to allow corrupt billionaires, the wealthy few, and cronies to fill in the void. This is exactly the world Vladimir Putin wants, and little by little, Donald Trump is helping him make it happen.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, the Senate is scheduled to vote to advance the nomination of Daniel Driscoll to serve as Army Secretary. That vote's scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can, of course, see the Senate live on C-SPAN 2 and get our full congressional coverage on C-SPAN Now and cspan.org. And a couple of media stories today. This afternoon, a federal judge refused to immediately order the White House to restore the Associated Press's access to presidential events, saying the news organization had not demonstrated it had suffered any irreparable harm. But he urged the Trump administration to reconsider its 2-week-old ban, saying that case law, quote, is uniformly unhelpful to the White House. The Associated Press, writing about this case, says, quote, U.S. District Judge Trevor N. McFadden's decision was only for the moment. However, he told attorneys for the Trump administration and the AP that the issue required more exploration before ruling. Now, the White House released a statement saying, quote, as we have said from the beginning, asking the President of the United States questions in the Oval Office and aboard Air Force One is a privilege granted to journalists, not a legal right. We stand by our decision to hold the fake news accountable for their lies, and President Trump will continue to grant an unprecedented level of access to the press. This is the most transparent administration in history. This whole fight began when the AP filed this lawsuit on Friday, saying that its First Amendment rights were being violated when they were banned by the White House, which began gradually 2 weeks ago. President Trump said it was punishment for the agency's decision not to entirely follow his executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. And also today, after a decade anchoring NBC Nightly News, Lester Holt announced that he will sign off later this summer. In a statement to NBC colleagues, he said, quote, after 10 years, 17 if you include my years on the weekends, the time has come for me to step away from my role as anchor of Nightly News. It has truly been the honor of a lifetime to work with each of you every day, keeping journalism as our true north and our viewers at the center of everything we do. Lester Holt is not leaving NBC, however. Instead, he will move to a full-time role as anchor of Dateline. Here's from the C-SPAN video library. Here he is welcoming the audience at Hofstra University before the first debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in September of 2016.
Nice to see every seat is filled. There was some question whether we'd have enough interest for tonight, but I guess we've taken care of that. Mrs. Trump, President Clinton, good to see you. Good to see everyone. That thud you heard backstage was the sound of my knees buckling when Frank mentioned a potential audience of 100 million. But it's just us tonight. And in a moment, it'll just be the three of us and hopefully just the two of them. That's what it's all about. As you can imagine, this is not an easy job, so I'm going to ask your help tonight. You heard the admonition. If you could please refrain from clapping and booing or reacting in any audible way, that would make my job a lot easier. And I know the American public would appreciate it because we really want to hear what they have to say tonight. And I'm happy to be the one facilitating that conversation. So what's going to follow are some awkward moments of silence. I'm going to take my seat here in my office for the evening, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning when we're about to come up on the air. And then no fancy lights or musical opens. We just go to it. So thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the debate.
You can see that debate and Lester Holt's other C-SPAN appearances at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it wherever you get your podcasts, and it's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum inviting you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. to across the country. And coming up Tuesday morning, Elaine Kmark of the Brookings Institution compares efforts by the Trump Department of Government Efficiency to reduce the size of the federal government to a similar effort she made in the Clinton administration. And then CQ roll calls Aidan Quigley on the planned House vote on the 2025 budget resolution. Also, Run Gen Z founder and President Joseph Mitchell talks about his organization's efforts into recruiting and training young conservatives into political office. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or online at cspan.org.